Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this first webinar in the Good to Great series. Today we'll be looking at the first step in improving passenger satisfaction at your airport, that is getting the basics right. So the idea of today is to help you get a better understanding of what are the basic drivers of passenger satisfaction and how you should best manage these if you want to be able to improve passenger satisfaction levels at your airports. Why good to great? Well, most airports we work with are already doing quite well. Passenger service levels are quite good, and most airports are doing a very good job of managing the passenger experience. The problem is when you want to go from being a good airport to being a great airport. So if you want to be able to see a strong increase in passenger satisfaction or regular increases in passenger satisfaction at your airports, you can't simply achieve that by doing what you're doing, but doing it a little bit better. From our experience working with airports around the world, what we have seen is that if you want to be able to maximize passenger satisfaction levels at your airport, it requires a change in mentality. It requires adopting the mentality of the world's best airports. Quite often you have a number of constraints which are limiting a number of factors which are influencing passenger satisfaction levels at your airport, and simply by doing what you're doing the same way or doing it a little bit harder will not help you overcome these. If you want to become one of the best airports in the world or see a strong increase of passenger satisfaction at your airport, you need to do things a little bit differently. It requires a step change in how you work, in the way you approach managing customer service. And it requires adopting the mentality of the world's best airports. And what we see is that the best airports in the world, what they do is that they make sure that when they manage passenger satisfaction, they always try to keep in mind trying to see their airport as their passengers do. So trying to understand exactly what the passenger sees when they go through the airport and focusing on what is most important to the passenger, not the airport. Until you do this and regularly go into your terminal and try to understand and try to see what passengers are facing from the way you're operating your airport, until you start doing that, you will never be able to achieve a significant increase in passenger satisfaction. So good to great is acquiring a different type of mentality and approaching customer service in a different way. And that's what these series of webinars are going to be focusing on. It's helping you understand and learn some of the practices which are helping the world's best airports achieve top levels of satisfaction. For those of you who don't know me, my name is James Ingram, and the company I work for specializes in helping airports around the world find ways to maximize passenger satisfaction levels. We do that through different services such as service quality audits and visits where we go to airports and help them understand exactly what is causing problems with passenger satisfaction and helping them find ways to fix that. We do passenger services to help airports, passenger surveys, to help airports and airport management understand what their travelers want and understand how they can adapt their service to their passenger profile and grow their revenue. And we're not interested in simply coming to your airport and telling you that if you want to be able to improve passenger satisfaction levels, you need to build a new terminal. No, what we try to do is we try to help you understand what you can do within your existing framework, your existing infrastructure, and with your limited budgets, what you can do to maximize passenger satisfaction levels within your airport. Because the good news is there is a lot that many airports can do. There are a lot of small things that you can do which will help you improve passenger satisfaction levels if you know where to look and you know where to focus. And so that's also going to be the focus of these webinars, is helping you understand some of the tricks or the tips or the best practices that will help you manage passenger satisfaction and improve passenger satisfaction levels without spending a large amount of money. Today's webinar is the first in a series of 4, which will help give you an overview of best practices for managing and improving customer satisfaction at your airports. The idea is to have a webinar which will last roughly 30 to 35 minutes today. A short webinar to help you understand today what are the basic drivers of passenger satisfaction and what are the best practices for managing those if you want to be able to improve and maximize passenger satisfaction levels at your airport. Next week, we'll be looking at processes and how you can design and manage your airport processes to keep passenger stress levels low. The third webinar will be focusing on what you can do to make your airport special, how you can differentiate your airport from all the others in your region or your competitors, and what you can do in terms of motivating and encouraging your stakeholders to become part of the global airport initiative to improve passenger satisfaction. So how can you create a more customer-focused organization, and what can you do to differentiate your airport from others in the region? The final webinar will be focusing on ambience. Airport ambience is one of the toughest aspects of airport service to improve, and if you want to be able to maximize passenger satisfaction levels, you really have to understand what drives airport ambience and how you can do that. So since that's a pretty large topic, I've done a full webinar on that, and that will be the last in the series of these webinars on going from good to great. So how to get the basics right, understanding what are the fundamentals of passenger satisfaction in airports. The way I've designed the webinars will focus on answering 4 key questions that will help you better understand, first of all, what are the main drivers of passenger satisfaction? So what are the basics? What do we need to get right if we want to maximize passenger satisfaction in our airport? We'll also be trying to understand the things that you should be doing and the things that you should be avoiding in terms of managing these services. So what are the best practices, and what are the things that you should absolutely avoid if you want to be able to improve passenger satisfaction when it comes to the drivers of global overall satisfaction? Finally, I'll be illustrating the presentation in the webinar today with examples of best practices from around the world to help you understand how the world's best airports are managing these services, to give you an idea of the type of new services or new way of approaching managing passenger satisfaction and managing customer service that these airports have put in place. So we'll start off with trying to look at what are the main drivers of passenger satisfaction. But when you manage passenger satisfaction at an airport, it's important to understand that not all aspects of airport service are equal. When it comes to improving overall satisfaction levels, which is the goal of most airports, you need to understand that not all service items will influence overall satisfaction in the same way. Some areas of airport service have much more of an impact on overall satisfaction than others. So when it comes to allocating your resources, if you want to be able to achieve the maximum increase of passenger satisfaction, you need to focus your efforts most on those areas which will have the strongest impact on overall satisfaction. And globally, based on our analysis of satisfaction levels at over 300 airports around the world, what we have found is that you can split airport services into 3 main groups. The first group is what we call the global influencing factors. These are the basic and the main drivers of passenger satisfaction in airports. These are cleanliness, ambience, and the washrooms. These are the fundamental drivers of passenger satisfaction. If you want to maximize passenger satisfaction levels at your airport, you need to make sure that you're achieving a strong level of performance in these areas. If you're not able to achieve a strong level of performance in these areas, you will never be able to improve overall satisfaction levels, no matter what other things that you do, even if you do them very well. So first and foremost and most important are the global influencing factors. Second, or what we call the basic airport processes. These are check-in, security, immigration, as well as some of the staff courtesy items and ease of finding your way. So the basic airport processes. When a passenger comes to your airport, at the end of the day, what they want to be able to do is they want to be able to catch their flight, and for that to be as simple as possible for them. So basic airport processes are important. Now the reason why we've put them in a second level of importance behind the global influencing factors is that what we found is for basic airport processes, these are not areas that will help you achieve top levels of satisfaction. What I mean by that is when you're performing very well in these areas, passengers simply just don't notice it. So if you have the fastest security in the world or the shortest check-in queues, passengers will take that for granted and will just think, okay, great, that was good, but they won't really notice it. It's not something that will help you achieve or become the best airport in the world overall. What's important to understand with processes is that these are areas which will only influence passenger satisfaction negatively. So they will only have an impact on your overall satisfaction levels when they're managed poorly. So if there's a problem with your processes, so if there's a major problem at security, for instance, and that's becoming the defining experience that passengers have at your airport, then you can expect that this will have a very strong negative impact on overall satisfaction levels. But if you have the best security in the world, chances are people won't really notice. I mean, it will be important and it will be part of the global airport experience, but it won't be something that will help you become the best airport in the world. So processes are important, but they come in second level of importance behind the global influencing factors. And we'll be looking in more detail at the airport processes aspect of improving passenger satisfaction in the second webinar, which will be taking place next week. The third category of airport services is what we've called comforting and diverting services. These are all the little extra things that you can do to make the passenger experience at your airport more enjoyable. Wi-Fi, shopping, restaurants. These are all ways that you will be able to differentiate your airport from other airports in the world. But they come in third position. What that means is that if you focus first on your shopping or first on your restaurants and disregard the global influencing factors and poorly manage your basic airport processes, you will not be able to achieve top levels of satisfaction. If passengers feel that you're maybe focusing too much efforts on the shopping and not enough on the washrooms, they'll think, well, maybe this airport hasn't understood my priorities and they're not trying to focus on what's most important to me. If you have the best shopping in the world, but your washrooms are disgusting and your security check took 25 or 30 minutes, chances are passengers will not be happy with your airport and will not be wanting to spend money in your shops. So yes, it's important to have extra services. Yes, it's important to focus on these, but keep in mind that that has to come as a third priority behind the global influencing factors and behind the basic airport processes. And I'll be looking in more detail at these comforting and diverting services and ways you can differentiate your airport and make it more special in the third webinar of this series. But today, what I want to focus on first is understanding the global influencing factors. And what I'll be focusing on today is especially airport cleanliness and washrooms. As I said, I'll be treating ambience completely separately as the final topic in this series of 4 webinars. So we've seen what are the basic drivers or the fundamental drivers of passenger satisfaction in airports. What I want to do now is give you a better idea of what are the best practices for managing these basics. So what are the things that you really need to focus on and get right if you want to be able to improve passenger satisfaction with cleanliness and with the washrooms. When it comes to cleanliness, what we often see when we visit airports is that people will tell us, oh, but our airport is very clean. We have a good cleaning schedule. We're cleaning the airport at least, I don't know, twice a day. The washrooms every hour, every half hour, we have people going in there and cleaning them. And we usually say, yes, that's great. But that will not guarantee that you have good satisfaction levels with cleanliness. Because when it comes to managing cleanliness, it's important to understand that from a passenger perspective, it's just not a matter of how often you clean or how well you clean your airport. It's how clean your airport seems overall. And there's a lot of other different factors that will have an influence on passenger perception of cleanliness. The lighting, the color schemes you use in your airport, how light or how dark it is, those will influence passenger perception of cleanliness at your airport. The materials you choose, some materials for your flooring or for your walls or colors will show up dirt or problems or uncleanness or water on the floor, for instance, whereas others will hide them. So by choosing different materials, you'll be giving your airport a cleaner or dirtier look. And you need to keep that in mind when you're planning improvements for your terminal or renovations. Some materials will make the airport seem dirtier, even though it is perfectly clean. Also, you need to make sure that you manage the presence of clutter in your airport. What we see from our work with airports around the world is that quite often a clean airport is an airport that is neat and tidy. So making sure that you don't have any clutter or litter in your airport is very important if you want to be able to maximize customer satisfaction levels. And finally, maintenance. Of course, maintenance plays a strong influence or a strong role in the passenger perception of cleanliness. If your facilities look run down or poorly maintained, passengers will just get the impression that they are dirty. So cleaning is not just a question of cleaning more and more often, it's a question of understanding what influences passenger perception of cleanliness and how you can go about managing that best at your airport in order to maximize passenger satisfaction levels with cleanliness. I want to illustrate this with a few examples now. These are two pictures from airport check-in facilities in the States. On the left is Cleveland Airport, and on the right is San Francisco. What you see is two very similar check-in facilities, two very different types of atmosphere, ambience, and also general feeling of cleanliness. On the left, what you see is that Cleveland Airport has chosen to use darker colors, both for the wall on the left-hand side, but also for the materials they're using on the floor. Whereas San Francisco Airport on the right, they're using brighter colors and lighter colors. And that's really important, because in both of these cases, these are older facilities which have lower ceilings. What we find is when you have older facilities with lower ceilings, just having a low ceiling tends to make the airport seem a bit dark and dingy and not very clean. So if, in the case of Cleveland, you're reinforcing that feeling of darkness by having dark colors on the wall, dark colors on the floor, you're just making the airport seem a bit more oppressing and a bit less enjoyable for passengers. On the other hand, San Francisco, what they've done is they've used light colors and tried to bring in a lot of natural light, which makes the check-in facility seem cleaner and more enjoyable. So when you think of cleanliness, you often have to think of, okay, what will make our airport seem more light, more airy, more enjoyable? Also, when you look at both these facilities, what you see is a big difference in terms of the amount of clutter or of different things that are in the terminal. In Cleveland on the left, you see they have lots of signage and the tensor barriers for the check-in. They have baggage carts against the wall and all that, which all add up to kind of add a general feeling of clutter and of untidiness in the airport. So even though you can see the floor is perfectly shiny and perfectly clean, just all this general clutter in the airport and this oppressive feeling makes the general feeling of cleanliness be less positive in Cleveland than it is on the right in San Francisco. And that's really important because that's the first impression passengers will be having of your airport as soon as they walk in the door. What do they see? They see check-in. And if your check-in feels a bit dark, dirty, and dingy, you're already starting off on a negative first impression, which may be hard for you to overcome with all the other services you have at your airport. When it comes to cleanliness, we find that a clean airport is often an airport that is neat and tidy. So tidiness and the absence of clutter is very important for improving passenger satisfaction or perception of cleanliness. Again, two very similar examples. On the left is the concourse with the gates in Vienna Airport in their newer facilities. And on the right is the concourse at Incheon Airport in Korea. Again, very similar situation, very different look and feel and general feeling of cleanliness. The problem with Vienna on the left is if you look down that concourse, they have gone and cluttered the concourse up with multiple objects and obstacles. They have benches, they have fids, they have signage that is of different colors and coming down from the ceiling. And all this just adds up to make the global impression of that terminal seem more cluttered and less nice. Incheon, on the other hand, absolutely nothing in the walkway, so it's perfectly clear for passengers to see down the terminal. They can see the gate numbers from far. And if you look on the right, those flowers and everything there is perfectly lined up, and the whole airport just seems absolutely neat and tidy. Both parts of these airports are absolutely new. Both are perfectly well cleaned. But what you see is that by a different choice of what you have in the terminal, so the presence or absence of clutter, will have a direct influence on passenger perception of cleanliness. Also, look at the placement of the fids. In Vienna on the left, it's absolutely right in the middle of the passageway. Whereas in Incheon, they've chosen to have it visible for passengers, but to get it out of the main thoroughfare and onto the right there, so anybody can go and see it, but it doesn't block and it doesn't clutter up the global look down the concourse. Also, Incheon is using much more natural light in that terminal, which just contributes again to a much more enjoyable atmosphere and sense of cleanliness than you have in Vienna, which is a bit darker and a bit more clinical in the terms of colors they've been using. So when it comes to cleanliness, a clean airport is quite often an airport that is neat and tidy. If you have visual pollution or clutter in your airport, it will make your terminal seem dirtier than it actually is. So you might be damaging perception of cleanliness just by having too many things in your terminal or too much clutter there. Maintenance is also essential. If the first thing passengers see when they walk in your door is a torn carpet covered in chewing gum, that's going to be a pretty hard negative first impression to overcome, even though you might have the best shopping or the best facilities in the rest of your airport. If you make a strong negative first impression of dirt as soon as people come in the airport, that will be very hard for you to overcome. Same thing with your maintenance. If your facilities are being patched up with duct tape or other temporary materials, that doesn't give the impression that the airport is doing its best to manage the facilities and to keep them up to what passenger expectations would be. When you have very visible patchwork done in your maintenance in your terminal, from a passenger perspective, it just seems like it's a bit run down and a bit old and not very nice. So even though your cleaning staff might be doing the hardest job in the world, if your maintenance teams aren't following up and actively repairing things when they get broken and making sure that the repair job looks good, if you're just patching things up, well, you'll end up with an average passenger experience and your overall satisfaction levels will be lower because of that. So in terms of maintenance, you really need to make sure that you're on top of that and are actively maintaining your airport and repairing things as quickly as possible. If you have to use or do temporary work, make sure you use good materials that look like they're good quality and so it doesn't seem run down. So it seems like, okay, we're fixing the problem and we've tried to put in the best possible material until we get the full final fix completed. And one of the questions we quite often get from airports, or one of the remarks we hear is that, oh, well, if we want to improve cleanliness, we have an older terminal, we'll just have to wait until we get a brand new facility and then all our problems will be solved. Well, we don't believe in that. We believe that as airports, you can actually do a lot with a small amount of money if you know how to focus your efforts and you understand the areas to focus on. Take this example. This is Upington in South Africa. The airport has 50,000 passengers per year, so a very small airport, older facilities, limited budget. On the other hand, they're able to achieve among the top levels of passenger satisfaction in the world just because they really do a really good job of managing their facilities well. If you look at that terminal, it's kept perfectly spotless. The ground is clean, everything is neatly lined up. You can tell the staff at that airport is proud of their facilities and are doing their best to actively manage the experience in the terminal. And then the airport's done a little bit to think outside of the box. Look at that seating in the check-in area. That's not expensive, but it's a small touch that helps make the airport feel much more cozy and enjoyable. Now, Upington is a very small airport, so by putting in different types of seating from your usual airport seats, they're able to reinforce that sense of cozy hometown airport and make it a strength for them. So the idea here is that you don't need brand new facilities if you want to achieve top levels of satisfaction. You just need to understand where to focus your efforts and to be able to identify those things which you're currently doing which are damaging your passenger experience. So identify the key service issues in your airport, which usually result from just doing business as usual and not trying to understand exactly what the passenger wants or expects or is experiencing at your terminal today. And now I want to show you a bit of data to help understand the differences that you can have when you manage cleanliness at the airport. This is data from a survey we did last year for Geneva Airport here in Switzerland, where they wanted us to help them understand passenger perception of cleanliness at their airport. And this slide is the normal correlation chart that you're probably used to seeing in some of the reports we send you. On the horizontal axis, you have the satisfaction levels. So areas to the right-hand side of that chart are areas of above average performance, and items on the left-hand side of the chart are items of below average performance at the airport. Then on the vertical axis, you have the importance to overall satisfaction. So the higher an item is, the more important it is to overall satisfaction. In this case, it's overall satisfaction with airport cleanliness. And the reason why I'm showing you this chart is if you look at the different colors of the dots on the chart, in blue, the blue dots are all areas which are airside facilities, and the gray dots are all areas which are landside facilities. So what you see is that in the case of Geneva, and this is also the case in other airports we've been working with, the areas which will have the most influence on passenger perception of cleanliness are all airside. That's normal. That's where passengers spend a lot of time when they're at their airport is airside. So that's where they'll be less stressed and will have time to notice your facilities. And so those are the areas which will come first in their minds when they think of how do we perceive the cleanliness of the airport. So what this means is that when you want to manage your cleanliness at your airport, you really need to make sure that you're focusing enough of your efforts on the airside facilities. So make sure you focus first on airside. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't focus on landside, because as we've seen in the example a couple slides ago, if you're making a negative first impression when passengers walk in the door because the landside facilities are dirty or aren't as clean as they could be, that will be a negative first impression which will be damaging to your passengers' overall perception of your airport, because you'll be damaging their experience right from the second they walk in the door. So the idea here is, when it comes to cleanliness, make sure you focus on airside facilities first, but don't neglect your landside, because one negative impression of your airport can have a very strong negative influence on passenger perception of cleanliness. And to illustrate that fact, I want to show you some of the data that we had found in terms of when we asked passengers at the airport in Geneva whether they saw litter or garbage in the terminal. What we saw is that 1/5 of passengers said they had seen garbage when they were going through Geneva Airport, or litter on the floor. And when you look at satisfaction levels between passengers who saw litter and passengers who didn't see litter, what you see is there's a huge difference in passenger perception depending on whether or not they saw garbage or litter in the terminal. Passengers who saw garbage when they were going through the terminal were about a 0.5 or 0.6 lower in terms of overall satisfaction with cleanliness than passengers who did not see. That's a huge gap, a huge difference. So one negative impression a passenger had of the airport was enough to sufficiently damage their perception of the airport's cleanliness. So when it comes to managing your airport cleanliness, if you want to be able to improve or to increase passenger satisfaction levels, you can't just go and continue business as usual. You need to really make sure there's a drive in your airport to absolutely never have any type of garbage or litter sitting around the terminal. You need to have people in the airport who are actively, as part of your staff is walking through the airport, see it as part of their job to pick things up and to make the terminal cleaner. Have everybody participate in the drive to make your airport as clean as possible. Because one poor experience could be ruining all your efforts and all your efforts to improve passenger satisfaction with cleanliness. Moving on to the washrooms. The washrooms are probably one of the facilities that the most passengers will be using at your airport. In Geneva, about 3/4 of passengers said they had been to the washrooms before taking their flight. Different passenger demographics will be more or less likely to use the washrooms. In Geneva, female passengers were more likely to use the washrooms than male passengers. Leisure passengers were more likely to use the washrooms than business passengers. And in Geneva, that's mainly related to the fact that leisure passengers tend to arrive at the airport earlier, and the longer you spend in the airport, the more likely you are to use the washrooms. My point with this is that different passenger demographics will be using your facilities in different ways. And if you want to be able to manage cleanliness of the washrooms and manage your airport washrooms, you need to understand which demographic is using your washrooms most and which demographic is more sensitive to washroom cleanliness. In Geneva, for instance, female passengers were much more sensitive to washroom cleanliness. So one of our recommendations to Geneva was to be able to make sure that they adapt their cleaning schedules to clean the female washrooms more often than the male washrooms, to make sure that the cleanliness of the female washrooms was kept at a slightly higher level than that of the male washrooms, because female passengers were more sensitive and were more likely to give the washrooms a lower score if they thought they were dirty. So to manage cleanliness, and especially cleanliness of the washrooms, you really need to understand what groups of passengers at your airport are more likely to use these and who will be more sensitive to the cleanliness of the facilities. As is the case with global cleanliness, broken facilities or poorly maintained facilities in your washrooms will kill passenger satisfaction with washrooms. In Geneva, passengers who saw broken toilets, wash basins, soap dispensers, or hand dryers gave overall satisfaction with the washrooms a much lower score than passengers who didn't. So as is the case with cleanliness, one poor negative experience is enough to damage the overall perception of your facilities. So if you want to be able to improve and increase passenger satisfaction levels with your washrooms, you need to make sure that your facilities are well maintained and there's nothing broken or not working. Just think of the hand dryers. If they're not working, what happens? Well, you have passengers who've washed their hands and have water all over their hands and they're dripping water all over the floors. So what happens then? Well, you're going to have water speckled all over your floor, and even if it's been cleaned maybe 10 minutes before, because there'll be drops all over it, it will just seem dirty for the next passengers coming in. So even if objectively it is clean, it will not seem clean to passengers, and that's what's most important when it comes to understanding the perception passengers have with cleanliness. From the washrooms, what do passengers want? Well, they want clean facilities that are working in working order, and they want them to be available when they need them. They don't want to have to hunt for washrooms all over your terminal. And some of the main reasons why airports fail to deliver on this are, first of all, a poor mix of facilities. If in your male washrooms you have more cubicles than urinals, for instance, and male passengers are more likely to want to use urinals, that will be a problem. Your passengers will not feel they have the type of availability of the facilities they want, and they will not be happy with your availability of washrooms. Same thing. If you're forcing passengers to change levels, go upstairs or downstairs to go to the washrooms, they will not feel that these are very easily available. So you could be damaging your perception of availability of washrooms by making people have to hunt for them. In terms of cleanliness, a poor choice of colors, of materials, of lighting will have a negative influence on passenger perception of the washrooms. If you look at the image on the left, what you see is, even though the facilities are clean, the colors and the lighting in the washroom is fairly dark. And if you look at that floor, the choice of materials for the flooring might not be the most adapted. It's a kind of a lightish grayish color that instantly shows up any drop of water on that floor. And what you see is that even though the washroom may have been cleaned within the last 10 minutes, there's already drops of water and places where people have been walking on it all over the floor. And so even though objectively it is clean, it doesn't seem clean to passengers. And of course, broken facilities, as I said before, is one of the key things you need to be avoiding if you want to be able to maximize passenger satisfaction levels with the washrooms. And the final point is making sure that your cleaning schedules match passenger flows. If you have big peaks of passengers going through your airport, you need to make sure that you're adapting your cleaning schedules to be cleaning more when you have the most passengers going through the terminal. And again, just some examples to illustrate this. Here are two examples of washrooms with a poor choice of flooring again. Again, what do you see? Well, on the left, passengers have to wash their hands on the right-hand side where the sink is, and then they have to walk over to the left where the paper dispenser is on the left-hand side. A dark flooring material instantly shows up every single drop of water on that floor. So even though the washroom might have been cleaned in the last 10 minutes, because of those drops, it just seems dirty for the next passenger coming in. Same thing on the right. Slightly lighter choice of flooring, but the material is not great and shows up every single speck of dirt on that floor and just makes the washroom seem dirtier. Broken facilities, I've spoken about that quite a bit. You cannot have this type of vision in your airport washrooms if you want to be able to improve passenger perception of availability and cleanliness. If people see this, they will feel that the airport is not doing a good job of maintaining the washrooms, and that will strongly damage their perception of your washrooms. And since it's a global driver of passenger dissatisfaction, you'll be creating having a negative influence on your overall satisfaction levels just because you're not being quick enough to maintain the washrooms. In this case, it would probably be even better just to close this washroom than to have passengers walk in and see that. In terms of improving the perception of cleanliness in the washrooms, small touches can go a long way. Again, we strongly believe that airports can improve passenger satisfaction levels by doing a lot of small things and a lot of things that don't cost much money. It doesn't cost much to have a nice vase with a nice orchid in it in the washrooms, but that adds a much nicer touch to the washrooms. It gives it a much more higher class feeling. And even though the washroom objectively isn't probably the best in the world, the perception of that is, oh, the airport's really doing a good job, really trying to make this experience as enjoyable as possible for me. And it's just a nice, friendly, special touch which can help you improve passenger satisfaction levels. When it comes to the washrooms, what you really need to do is, if you want to be able to maximize passenger satisfaction levels, you really need to think of what does a 5-star washroom experience look like. On the left, that's Seoul Incheon Airport, probably one of the most original washroom designs we've ever seen, with sinks of different heights for different types of passengers, different mirrors, each sink has its own personal mirror. And then on the back, you can't really see it, but those are iPads on the wall showing pictures of Korea. So again, bringing the local culture and the sense of place even into the washrooms. On the right, these are the washrooms, the women's washrooms actually, in San Francisco Airport's new econ course. What I found really good about this is the airport's gone all the way to add kind of a special lounge area in the female washrooms, because they have understood that some of their female passengers will want to be able to refresh themselves before catching their next flight. And so they want to make the washrooms a place which is enjoyable for them to do that as possible. So adding the seats in this kind of a nice atmosphere, it's really nice for female passengers to be able to go in there and sit down and relax a bit quietly in the washrooms before catching the flight. So small touches can go a long way to showing the airport has actively understood what passengers might want. And again, you're probably in the best position to go and do new things or try new things. If you have something that you believe could make your passenger experience even better, I would really encourage you to try that, because thinking outside of the box, you can have some really good ideas that can help you maximize passenger satisfaction and do something a little bit differently. This is the men's washroom, again in San Francisco. And the reason I like this picture is, look at that choice of lighting. Look at the atmosphere and the mood and the perception that they're giving with these washrooms. Also, what I really like is that they have the air blade dryers there right next to the sinks. So passengers wash their hands and then instantly can dry them in the air blade dryers. And so what that does is that minimizes the amount of drops that get on the floor, and so contributes to keeping the washrooms seem as clean and nice as possible. Again, San Francisco, and one final picture just to show you a really good example of flooring. If you look at this floor, what I think is really interesting about it is that all the little speckles on the floor do a really good job of hiding any kind of dirt that could be in the terminal. So since the floor is already a little bit speckled, passengers won't be able to tell what's the difference between any kind of drop of water on the floor and the design of the floor itself. So that kind of flooring does a really good job of hiding the dirt, whereas the more uniform tiling that we saw in some of the examples previously show up every single speck of dirt on that floor. So even small things like choices of materials in your airport can contribute to creating a sense of cleanliness or dirtiness in your airport. And that's important to keep in mind when you're managing the passenger experience. So in conclusion, if you want to be able to improve passenger satisfaction levels at your airport, you really need to make sure that you're managing the basic fundamental drivers of passenger satisfaction well: cleanliness, ambience, and the washrooms. What you really want to avoid doing is have any kind of thing or facility in your terminal which could provide a negative impression to your passengers. Broken facilities, litter, anything that's in your terminal which will create a negative impression of your terminal needs to be removed or fixed as quickly as possible if you want to be able to maximize passenger satisfaction levels. In terms of maintenance, you need to make sure that you're not patching up your terminal with temporary maintenance, but actively fix things as soon as they're broken, or use good materials to maintain them if you have to do a temporary replacement. Older facilities, make sure that you use light colors and avoid dark colors, especially in areas with lower ceilings. When it comes to cleanliness, passengers perceive an airport as being clean when it's nice and light and airy. So light, airy facilities go a long way to making your airport seem cleaner. And finally, you need to make sure that you avoid any type of clutter or garbage or visual pollution in your airport, which will be contributing to this feeling of this airport is probably not as nice or not as clean as it could be. So clutter is the absolute enemy of any type of cleanliness or any type of atmosphere in your airport. If you want to adopt the mentality of the world's best airports, You need to make sure that you're focusing first and foremost on the airside, but you don't neglect your landside facilities. You need to understand which passengers at your airport are most sensitive to cleanliness and make sure that you adapt your cleaning schedules to reflect that, to focus first and foremost on the facilities which will be used by people who are most sensitive to cleanliness. And finally, if you want to be among the best airports in the world, or if you want to help your airport from going from being simply a good airport to being a great airport, you need to set yourself high standards. If you're setting yourself an average standard, you'll end up with an average airport. If you want to improve, you need to focus everybody and get everybody understanding that they need to do their job a little bit differently, and they need to focus on maximizing passenger satisfaction and providing the best possible passenger experience. And everybody working in your airport needs to be actively doing that. So your staff have to be proud of the airport and proud of what you're achieving. Those are most important if you want to be able to maximize passenger satisfaction levels. And finally, I'd add that improving passenger satisfaction levels with these drivers doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. You can go a long way with a small budget if you know where to focus your efforts and if you know what type of things to focus on that will help you get the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to maximizing passenger perception of your airport. If you want to take what we've seen today a little bit further, what we're currently doing is we're offering free assessments of your airport based on pictures. That is, if you send me some pictures of your terminal, we'll analyze them for you and put together a short report explaining what we think are the key issues that you are having in your terminal and which could be causing passenger dissatisfaction, and give you some tips and recommendations which will help you improve passenger satisfaction levels quickly. This is 100% free of charge, and if you're interested in taking us up on that offer, all you have to do is send me an email, and I'll be very glad to send you the list of types of pictures we would be needing to create our analysis. Otherwise, I'd invite you to join us again next week. Again, next Thursday, the webinar this time will be focusing on airport processes and what are the best practices for managing airport processes in order to keep passenger stress levels low and to make sure that they don't affect the passenger experience in a negative way. So the second webinar in the Good to Great series will take place next Thursday, 27th of March. And again, I'll be sending you, same thing, a link to join the webinar. I hope you'll be able to join us again next week. In the meantime, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you all for joining me today, and I hope it's been a useful, good presentation for you, and that I'll see you again at next week's presentation. Thank you very much.